The next session is ecological protection and conservation, and it's about the big Sandy Crayfish versus Norfolk Southern, and I really do mean it's almost like a versus. It's very adversarial. This crayfish is very ornery apparently. But Ruth Brown with Norfolk Southern and Jennifer Sunley and Doug Dorsey, my cousin Doug, by the way, hi Doug, from Hanson Professional Services actually authored this presentation. Ruth and Jennifer are going to be the presenters. Ruth is with Norfolk Southern. She's a regional engineer of structures for the Southern region at NS. She's a graduate from Georgia Institute of Technology with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering with a focus on structures. She is an active member of AREMA Committee 15, Steel Structures. In fact, she's currently vice chair of subcommittee, or Committee 15, sorry. Jennifer, I've known Jennifer since she was like knee-high, it feels like. Graduated with a master's in biology from Illinois State. She's a specialist in federal and state compliance with the Clean Water Act, including Section 404 permitting with the Corps of Engineers, and Section 401 water quality certification with various state agencies, and of course with EPA for tribal lands. Jennifer is currently the Natural Resources Discipline Manager at Hanson and spent the last 14 years assisting Class 1 railroads and federal compliance initiatives. So Ruth and Jennifer, tell us about these darn crayfish.
This is Ruth Brown with Norfolk Southern. Our project location is actually Matewan, West Virginia. That has a colorful history. It's where the Hatfield-McCoy feud took place. And you'll see in our photos, the opposite side of our bridge is actually one of the tunnels that's labeled as such as being part of that feud. The Norfolk Southern Bridge actually spans across the Tug Fork River, and the state line is in the river between West Virginia and Kentucky. The bridge is labeled in 462.01 by Norfolk Southern's milepost designation. We have a Main 1 and a Main 2 at this location. You can see in the photo the side-by-side bridges, and each bridge consists of 250-foot-long through truss spans. Norfolk Southern did a fatigue analysis rating on this structure and found that unfortunately it was not rated high enough for the current coal traffic we were running on it. And we contracted Hanson to conduct the permitting and design for replacement in 2017. We started financially with just focusing on the replacement of Main 2. When the design was completed and the permit seemed to be close in hand, we bid the project out and awarded it for construction in August 2018. We continue to anticipate receiving the permit soon. Unfortunately, we did not. And to kind of mitigate the delay in construction, we designed and incorporated the construction into the contract in March 2019 for Main 1 as well. So come June 2019, we finally received our permit. The permit had some clauses and requirements for access that was different than the assumption for construction. So we had to authorize a change order associated with that. And ultimately, the bridges were replaced, and the new bridges are in service as of April 2020.
Thanks, Ruth. As stated before, my name is Jennifer Sunley, and I'm with Hanson Professional Services. Hanson began the design and permitting for the replacement of the Matewan bridges in 2017, with first conducting a wetland delineation. Within the project area, only the Tug Fork River was observed, and a pre-construction notification was submitted to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Replacement of the bridges would result in minor impacts to the Tug Fork for the installation of Pier 3 and temporary impacts for the removal of the existing center piers and placement of a rock causeway for construction access. The following permits were also obtained for the project: a West Virginia Department of Natural Resources license and right of entry permit. This permit required the completion of a mussel survey. However, no mussels were found within the project area. A Kentucky Department of Environmental Protection stream construction permit, floodplain permits from Pike County, Kentucky, and Mingo County, West Virginia, and a West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection NPDES general stormwater permit. This presentation focuses on the Corps of Engineers permit and the resulting Section 7 consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. General Condition 18 for the Corps of Engineers permit states that no activity is authorized under any nationwide permit which may affect a listed species or critical habitat, unless Endangered Species Act Section 7 consultation has been completed. Upon initial consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service, 4 species were listed as potentially occurring within the project area: the gray bat, the Indiana bat, the northern long-eared bat, and the big sandy crayfish. It was determined that the project would have no effect on any of the bat species due to the lack of trees and tree clearing within the project area. However, Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the project may affect the big sandy crayfish. An initial crayfish survey was conducted in June of 2018. No crayfish were found within the project area, and 2 were found about 82 feet downstream of the project area. Also, the project area did not contain any riffles or slab boulders, the suspected preferred habitat for the crayfish in 2018. Several obstacles were apparent early in the consultation process regarding the big sandy crayfish. The first being that the big sandy crayfish was just listed in 2016. We started working on this project in 2017. The Fish and Wildlife Service did not have a conservation plan or a recovery plan for the species. At the time of the project, there was no critical habitat information published. In fact, the critical habitat plan for the big sandy crayfish was just published in January of this year. Also, there was only 2 big sandy crayfish experts in West Virginia. One worked for the consulting firm Environmental Solutions and Innovation, ESI, and the other was a professor at West Liberty University in West Virginia. Both these experts had been involved in listing of the crayfish as a threatened species. Another obstacle that had large consequences for Norfolk Southern, both in terms of the project budget and the schedule, was the continually changing knowledge regarding the preferred habitat and movements of the big sandy crayfish as we were writing and negotiating conditions of the biological assessment. Initially, the species was thought to be somewhat sedentary, spending most of their time tucked in and under slab boulders and preferring high-flowing riffle areas with little sedimentation or pollution. Later, it was determined that the crayfish were not sedentary, and in fact, they were quite active and capable of traveling large distances both up and downstream within a day. In addition to the changing science around the species, the local West Virginia Fish and Wildlife Office was facing a lot of pressure in regards to the big sandy crayfish from both local environmental groups and coal mining companies. The photo on this slide is an article written in the Washington Post about the big sandy crayfish and the coal mining companies and their battles. The potential adverse impacts on the crayfish from the coal projects was much larger than the railroad project. So Fish and Wildlife decided that the biological assessment for the rail project would be issued first. But the service continued to be very, very nervous about this project and the other projects from the coal mining companies, and were very hesitant to make any decisions because they would be setting a precedent for the species. Norfolk Southern, Hanson, and ESI, our crayfish expert, negotiated with the service all through 2018 and 2019. The first draft of the biological assessment, which included a rock causeway, was submitted in October of 2018. Our project team then had an in-person meeting with the agency later that month. In November of 2018, the Fish and Wildlife Service, upon consultation with their crayfish expert, the professor at West Liberty University, determined that the rock causeway could potentially attract crayfish to the project site. So our project team, working with the contractor, revised the temporary access to now include a temporary bridge and a cofferdam instead of the rock causeway. The completed cofferdam can be seen at the top on this top photo. We also proposed to conduct crayfish monitoring during the installation of the temporary structures, or what we refer to as in-water work, and to fund the establishment of a big sandy crayfish holding facility at West Liberty University. The revised BA was submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Service in December of 2018, and then the federal government shut down for 35 days. Once the government shutdown ended on January 25th of 2019, we were able to negotiate the specifics of the crayfish monitoring. For the crayfish monitoring, a survey would be conducted once every 10 days during in-water work, which included the installation of the temporary bridge and cofferdam. Once the structures were in place, then all work would be conducted outside or above the Tug Fork River, and the monitoring surveys would be discontinued. It was agreed that the first 50 crayfish would be transported to the White Sulphur Springs Fish Hatchery until the Norfolk Southern funded West Liberty Hatchery could be established. The photo in the top here is the transportation of the crayfish to the hatchery. The next 15 crayfish would be fitted with transmitters. A transmitter can be seen on the bottom left photo. Any additional crayfish too small for transmitters would be tagged with an elastometer, and this is seen in the bottom right photo. The biological opinion and the Corps of Engineers permit were issued in June of 2019. 10 crayfish surveys were conducted between June and September of 2019 as the cofferdam and temporary bridge were installed. The biological opinion allowed for an incidental take of 57 adults and 909 juveniles. The biological opinion defined an incidental take as removing the big sandy crayfish from the action area and storage at the holding facility, or accidentally crushing during the surveys. In the surveys conducted through September of 2019, 50 crayfish were transported to the hatchery. 6 adults were fitted with transmitters and 14 adults, too small for transmitters, and 7 juveniles were elastometer tagged. These crayfish were then placed back in the Tug Fork River. 2 adults and 1 juvenile were crushed during the surveys. Summary emails were sent to the Fish and Wildlife Service after each survey detailing the number of handled crayfish, and a summary report was submitted to the Corps of Engineers and Fish and Wildlife in December of 2020. The project team, including our crayfish expert, anticipated resuming the crayfish surveys in the summer of 2020 during the removal of the temporary bridge and cofferdam. Communication with the staff at the Fish and Wildlife Service at the time agreed with this assumption. The project team was notified by the Corps of Engineers in June of 2020 that the project was in non-compliance because we had exceeded our permitted incidental take, and our permit was then suspended. This was a critical time for the project because we are planning to start the removal of the temporary structures within that month. It was also confusing because all communication with the Fish and Wildlife Service during the original survey window did not indicate any issues or concerns with the incidental take numbers. What had happened was, between the late fall of 2019 and June of 2020, the entire staff of the West Virginia Fish and Wildlife Field Office had turned over, and the new staff had a different interpretation of the incidental take numbers. Working very closely with the Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife Service, we quickly negotiated new survey conditions. Since we had reached the 50 crayfish limit at the hatchery, all crayfish found during the next set of surveys would either be fitted with a transmitter or elastometer tagged. Any crayfish that was handled was counted as take. In addition, 5 monitoring surveys would be conducted upon completion of the in-water work. The BO was reissued in July of 2020, and the Corps permit reinstated. The crayfish surveys were completed in September of this year, and we are in the process right now of completing the 5 monitoring surveys. Several lessons were learned throughout this project. The project was delayed by over a year, and significant costs were incurred due to agency coordination, evolving species condition, and permit construction requirements. Early and frequent communication with the agencies was very important. We coordinated and engaged with the Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife Service starting in 2017. In many of our initial meetings with the Fish and Wildlife Service, they would tell us that they were 2 weeks out from issuing the biological opinion. However, this turned out not to be the case. Due to the unknowns of the species and the pressure on the agency that the agency was receiving from outside groups, they were extremely hesitant to make any decisions regarding the crayfish or this project. When writing our initial draft of the biological assessment, we found that we needed to carefully define all industry and even construction terms to avoid confusion. Examples of terms that we needed to provide clear definitions of, just to name a few, were riprap, causeway, cofferdam, gabion baskets, and turbidity curtains. Another valuable component is to engage species experts early in the process. By engaging with one of the 2 species experts early in the project, we were able to track the new developments regarding the species and propose changes to the temporary construction structures so that they wouldn't attract the crayfish to the project area. We were also able to lay out the monitoring requirements and to find a solution to the lack of an established hatchery. Additionally, it's very important when doing these projects to verify the initiation of formal consultation. For several months, the project team and the Corps of Engineers believed that we were within the formal consultation window, and we were negotiating in good faith as the Fish and Wildlife Service kept stating that they were just a few weeks from a resolution. Once the Corps of Engineers started to press on the Fish and Wildlife Service for a conclusion to this process, the service stated that technically the formal consultation process had not begun because they had never received a letter from the Corps of Engineers to initiate the formal consultation. So going forward, always request to see the letter from the Corps of Engineers initiating formal consultation so that everybody is officially on the same page. The documentation of all communications with the agencies was very vital. During the entire project, we were extremely careful to document all of our agency communications in emails, memos, and reports. This proved to be extremely beneficial when the Fish and Wildlife Service staff changed over and the new staff did not agree with our original interpretation of take. We were able to show the Army Corps of Engineers very clear agreement between our species experts and the former Fish and Wildlife staff on how we were counting take. This really helped because the Corps of Engineers exerted a lot of pressure on the Fish and Wildlife Service to work with us to reissue the VO quickly and to keep the project on track for the removal of the temporary structures. Finally, Norfolk Southern decided to start construction on portions of this project not within the Tug Fork River prior to the issuance of the Corps of Engineers permit. We were continually told by the agencies that the permit was imminent. However, this turned out not to be true, and we spent over a year negotiating the conditions of the VO, causing significant delays in the construction process. So this has just been a brief overview of our Matewan project and the struggles we face regarding the big sandy crayfish and the agencies, and we are now open to questions. And here's a picture of the bridge.
Thanks so much. You guys, it's very frustrating. I know this is almost the norm rather than the exception. Anything you would have done different?
I think if we had known at the time that we were as far away, and I believe Ruth would agree that they probably would not have started construction prior to the issuance of all the permits. But we were told that we were very, very close the whole time, and that just turned out not to be true. So that's probably the biggest thing. And just to realize how absolutely nervous the Fish and Wildlife was to make any decisions on this project.
And Ruth, I know the pressure you're in, you know, with the railroad getting the project built. So I know that's frustrating for you as well.
We would have delayed the construction if we had realized the amount of time associated with the permit. Like I said, there was a significant change order associated with, you know, going to the sheet pile encasement and a work bridge versus a causeway. So, you know, having to deal with that down the road versus known up front was very significant.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. That's something I think most of us on this virtual conference are faced with on a day-to-day basis, especially the changing of the guard and changing in staff at these regulatory agencies. It's tough to overcome. So thank you. Very nice. Very good job. Good job. All right. There is a question, but again, I'm going to have Emma, if you can, please just forward that on to Ruth and Jen, and and we'll get an answer that way.